So as I mentioned, we are celebrating a wedding here at St. Luke's this afternoon, and I realize that the way that I often preach, which is a whole lot of thinking, a whole lot of praying, a whole lot of reading, and then whatever's going to come out comes out, that I might accidentally start talking to you about Shannon and Mike and the value of marriage. And I thought I better write some stuff down this time, just because I want to make sure I'm giving the right sermon to the right folks. So if you will excuse me, I have a little bit more of a template than I typically have. But I really love these parables. This is one of my very favorite gospel lessons because we get so many examples. And there's also that moment when he's like, do you understand what I'm saying? And they're like, sure. But do they? Because I know I've been there. Oh, yes, I totally know. And then it's like, do you know what he was talking about? But I love all of these examples. We had an excellent conversation at Bible study this week about this, and it's just so delightful to hear how God shows up in so many ways in the world. So we heard today about a mustard seed, hidden treasure, and the pearl of great value. And they're not just illustrations today, but they kind of sound like adventure stories. Stories of everyday people, a farmer, a cook, a fisherman, people who could be me or you to point to God's nearness. God is not about impossible things, power, wealth, having everything we want or need. The kingdom of heaven is about regular people doing regular things, but approached in a new way. God's reign is about life considered differently, offering a new light that illumines changed expectations for what is normal. Through the parables, through these stories that shift our attention from the high and mighty to the just regular, or even normal, Jesus announces to the ancient people and the Roman Empire and to us today that upheaval is afoot. When we speak of the mustard seed of faith, we marvel at how something so small as the dot from a pencil could develop into something so mighty and life-serving. I recently learned, however, that this mustard seed parable likely created some confusion or puzzlement to Jesus' listeners. It may surprise you to learn that back in the day, mustard was not everyone's favorite hot dog condiment. And in fact, it was the kudzu or the bindweed or the super crazy dandelion of the ancient world. Mustard was considered noxious, invasive, annoying, and tenacious. A mustard seed is so small it can easily end up in a handful of grain without the sower having any idea. So the man who sowed that single mustard seed likely had no idea that his land was going to suddenly be filled with big, noxious weed bushes. Maybe he really did sow it intentionally, believing he could keep the mustard contained. But the kingdom of heaven, or God, is like the metamorphosis of a cultivated field into a wild and leafy bird sanctuary. Once the reign of heaven takes root, it does its thing. These parables tell us God shows up in wild and leafy places as surely as in perfectly tended fields and manicured rows, in both the surprising and the everyday. Every bit of life, even the curious and puzzling bits, are adventure tales, a clue, a map toward the kingdom of heaven and God. If these parables we heard today are true, if God shows up in unexpected, surprising, and sometimes even slightly annoying ways, like in the form of a noxious weed, what simple and surprising things in our lives could we use to tell people about how and where to find God? If you are like the storyteller, the adventurer, the map maker for the kingdom of heaven, what stories do you share? My guess is our personal best parables aren't about how much of the Book of Common Prayer we've memorized, or how many hours we spend praying every day, or even how often we come to church. Instead, we're likely to tell parables about God and faith by saying, like, the kingdom of heaven is like a belly laugh shared with your best friend. Or the kingdom of heaven is like the ice cream truck song on a hot summer day. Or the kingdom of heaven is like a Wonder Woman Band-Aid on a skinned knee. Or the kingdom of heaven is like hiking in the cool mountain woods with my dog. Jesus' parables are stories about life's mundane moments, not moments of glory. They're about weeds, bread making, digging in the dirt, and catching fish for dinner. They're about taking something that may be frustrating and annoying and creating sanctuary, comfort, and ease. They share everyday details of life in ways that remind us that when we believe in the incarnation of God, we aren't just talking about Jesus. We're talking about the whole world around us. This understanding of God is what we explored at Cosmos Camp a few years ago. Nearly 24 middle school students joined counselors, scientists, including your former deacon, Linda Brown, and me as their chaplain for 7 days of diocesan camp near Woodland Park at Cathedral Ridge. We played, hiked, explored, and questioned together. We were curious about how faith and science intersect. We looked for God in each moment of our days, whether trekking, playing gaga ball, riding the zip line, eating s'mores, or studying cloud formations. And like in our parables, God showed up in surprising and unexpected ways. We found God inside geodes that we cracked open with rock hammers, in astronomy lessons taught around the campfire, while walking the labyrinth lit only by candlelight, in water balloon fights full of screaming and laughter, when looking at bugs under a microscope, and while persevering on the ropes course. God was with us through homesick tears, and then just days later, while crying as we said goodbye to new friends. Certainly, God showed up during chapel time each night, but amazingly, beautifully, gratefully, we noticed that God was with us the rest of the time too. Each evening, we spent chapel time talking about how and where God showed up for us that day. We chose a word of focus, a word like humor or adventure or compassion, and then took turns telling stories or offering examples of God in that word as it manifested in our day. Our final night of storytelling, sharing our parables of God, lasted nearly 2 hours as the youth talked about all the ways God appeared to us and for us that week. When we have eyes to see and ears to hear, we recognize that the whole world embodies the divine. God is not simply the creator. God is creation. This place, Earth, our fragile island home, is not yet the kingdom of heaven, but we certainly have opportunities to show how it can be like God's kingdom. Seeds and plants, baking bread, fishing, these are things that occupied the people of Jesus' time and occupy our time here as well. They remind us that God is as near as a weed and a loaf of bread and a rock and a water balloon. God is present in our everyday lives and in the smallest things that make up the minutiae of who we are and what makes up our world. Jesus transformed others by showing them the nearness of heaven, offering God through comfort and sanctuary in the unexpected. Like yeast, God is fermenting the kingdom of heaven in us and in our world. And if God can use invasive weeds, bread, and fish to grow the kingdom, imagine what God can cultivate in you and in us and in St. Luke's. Let our lives be ones in which even the weeds, even the annoying bits and the unexpected and the incredibly mundane become like compasses pointing the way toward God for the world for ourselves. Amen.